welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I am very happy to be joining you once again on a Tuesday here in the middle of October to bring you a returning author for an author interview. As we get started, I do want to remind you, as I always do, to please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you're either listening to or watching the episode on. As always, this helps the podcast get to more readers such as yourselves. It really does help the algorithm. If you would like to help in a different way, if you're so inclined, you can go to gsmcpodcast.net. There you can leave a tip or a donation, whatever you want to refer to it as. I know I always say tip or donation, either or and whatever. Just think of it as supporting not only this podcast, but the network as a whole. It is something else that really does help the podcast. And as I keep saying as well, your support is greatly appreciated. Whatever form that support is, whatever form that support takes, I am super grateful that you have been a part of this podcast. Whether this is the first one you've ever listened to, or you've listened to them all, which is amazing, or somewhere in between, I appreciate you. I appreciate your support. Thank you so much. Again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. And how is your week going? How was your weekend? Weekend was fine, busy, taught lessons as usual. Today was really interesting in terms of the lessons that I taught. It was a mixture of ages and cultures and nationalities for students that I taught. And we had some really eclectic conversations. I have some students that I do free talk conversations with. I have some students that have set lessons. It really depends on what the student is looking for, what we've agreed to work on, some of the curriculum that they use. There's a lot of factors that go in. So each lesson is different. Each person, of course, is different. And today was just this really wonderful, interesting mixture of students and good conversation. And I had so much fun teaching today. So I'm not going to, bore you with all the details just because I thought it was fun and interesting doesn't mean that everyone will think the conversations were fun and interesting, but just the range of topics that were covered today, from cranberry harvesting to crime scene investigations to wedding traditions. I mean, and even more than that. So I don't know. Some days you finish the day exhausted, and some days you finish the day like, wow, that was really cool. And today I might have still been a little tired, but it was a really cool day. So I'm grateful for that. And then it's been busy for a lot of reasons in addition to teaching, but overall a good day. I hope you also had a good day. It's a good day for another reason, because I have a returning author joining the podcast again. This is Michael J. Cooper's. This is what we just saw. Let me click on the correct one. This is Michael J. Cooper's third time on the podcast. This time we are talking about his book, The Rabbi's Knight. This is a prequel to the two books that he talked about on his previous interviews. That was Wages of Empire and Crossroads of Empire. Those were the books that we talked about. This one is The Rabbi's Knight. It is a prequel by 500-ish years or so quite a bit in the past for this book. Let me go ahead and give you a description of this book, and that is as follows. The year is 1290. At the twilight of the Crusades, war-weary Knight Templar Jonathan St. Clair is garrisoned in the port city of Acre in the Holy Land. In possession of an ancient scroll with a cryptic inscription, he learns that it holds the key to unlock the secrets of Jerusalem's Temple Mount. But time is running out. Acre will soon come under siege, and the one man able to divine the scroll's meaning, Rabbi Samuel of Baghdad, has been targeted for assassination. St. Clair apprentices himself to Rabbi Samuel, and together they travel to Jerusalem. On their pilgrimage, they are hunted by scheming emirs in the service of a bitter enemy of Rabbi Samuel, but they are aided in their quest by others. A brilliant young scholar, Isaac of Acre, a powerful young Scotsman, William Wallace, a learned Muslim mathematician, physician, and cartographer, Al-Hassani, and a beautiful, independent-minded woman, Zahirah, who avoids serving in an emir's harem by hiding in a leper colony on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Rabbi Samuel, St. Clair, and the others will risk everything to fulfill their shared and sacred destiny as guardians of the Temple Mount. And again, that is the Rabbi's Night. You see the cover there next to me. You see the author photo. This, as I said, is a prequel. This is historical fiction, as I'm sure you gathered from the description. Apparently, I cannot form words after teaching all day, and I struggled with reading some of that. I apologize for stumbling over some of the words as I read you that description. But this is, as a prequel, you get some connections, of course, to Wages of Empire and Crossroads of Empire. And then potentially the third book is called End of Empire. That one is not out yet. We've gone back to the prequel, which is a reworking of a book that Michael wrote about 15 years ago, and we'll talk about that some in the interview. But we're in 1290. We're at the end of the Crusades, and you've got this really interesting combination of unlikely friendships, because you've got a Jewish rabbi, you've got a Knight Templar, you've got not only a Muslim who is in a relationship, a friendly relationship with a rabbi and a Knight Templar, but she is a woman, and female-male relationships, of course, friendships, complicated in a lot of historical periods, but just one more layer of complication. And yet they come together and they are just trying to decipher the secrets in this text that Jonathan has. And all of this plays into something that we learned about the main character, Evan, of the later trilogy that Michael came to talk about before, something that he discovers about his family history, his family lineage, because Jonathan is a descendant of, an ancestor of Evan. Evan is a descendant of Jonathan, and that whole the whole family tree and what they are deciphering and figuring out comes into play in the later books. So we are going to talk more about this, of course, but once again, the book is called The Rabbi's Night. The author is Michael J. Cooper. Let's go ahead and turn to the interview with Michael. Hi, Michael, and welcome back to the podcast.
Hello. Good to be with you, Sarah.
I'm glad to have you back, and we are going to talk about the Rabbi's Night today. But before we do that, just refresh people on who you are. Give a brief introduction.
Okay. My name is Michael Cooper. I'm a resident of Northern California, born and bred up in this area until the age of 17, when I finished high school and I emigrated to Israel. I had gone for a year program, and one thing led to another, and I stayed for 11 years. Among other things, I worked extensively there, both teaching guitar and English on Israel TV, and ultimately I managed to get into medical school there and finished the program after 6 years, which is the way things work in most of the world other than in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And then I returned to the United States to specialize in pediatric cardiology. And I did that endeavor for about 40 years. And in the course of that, I would travel also back to the region, not necessarily to Israel, where I visited my relatives, but to the Palestinian territories, where I did medical missions, providing care to children without access to specialty pediatric cardiology care. So I've done that for the last 20 years, up until the last few years, which have become extremely complicated.
Right.
But I'm hoping to get back in about a month, but we shall see.
Yeah. Yeah. And now you are writing historical fiction, all of which is set in that area. So
Exactly. Yeah.
just not quite at the same time that you were there.
Not exactly. But what's interesting is, given the tendency of empire, specifically the Ottoman Empire, in kind of keeping the Holy Land sort of in the backwaters, it had changed very little since about the 15th century.
Right.
And so the old city of Jerusalem that I saw was much the same as it was back when the events in the Rabbi's Night are taking place.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's really quite amazing, actually,
Yeah.
that you can see it basically how it was.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that is very impressive. Being in California, or uh, obviously Portugal is also full of that wonderful sense of antiquity,
Yeah.
but California, not so much.
Not quite as much. Yeah.
Exactly. It's 200 years old. It's really, really old. There, it's yesterday.
Some really few prequel.
The story, a war-weary Knight Templar, Jonathan St. Clair, who's garrisoned in the port city of Acre. This is the twilight. He's in possession of an ancient, and he becomes more interested when he learns of child for the end, because from the rabbi said, he apprentices himself to the rabbi, and together with Zahirah, a beautiful Muslim woman who had been avoiding a local emir by hiding in a leper colony, they traveled to Jerusalem. Yeah. On the journey, St. Clair is torn between his vow of celibacy and his desire for Zahirah, and for her part, Zahirah finds herself drawn to the night as she navigates a narrow path constrained by expectations and tradition. But once in Jerusalem, the rabbi, the knight, and Zahirah are joined by a prominent Muslim physician, originally from Baghdad, who was also a cartographer and an old friend of the rabbi from their days in Baghdad. And together they endeavor to solve the riddle of St. Clair's scroll, risking everything to fulfill their shared and sacred destiny. The temple.
Yeah, this is also you wrote.
Yes. And that, unfortunately, the publisher would not bring it out in paperback. As much as I complained, didn't help, and so it didn't sell particularly well in hardcover. And so I wanted to reissue it, both from the standpoint of availability as well as from the standpoint of really focusing on this unlikely friendship, not necessarily the unlikely friendship between the rabbi and the knight, but the knight and the young Muslim woman, Zahirah.
Right.
And so that's something I also wanted to emphasize in this new edition.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier that, there are some complicated friendships in this book that could be considered complicated in a lot of different historical time periods, but certainly the time period, the male-female nature of the relationship, the different religious tendencies, the different religious beliefs of the characters in this book make for some complicated relationships. And we're going to talk about that more when we come back from our first break, more about the complicated nature of the relationship between especially Jonathan and Zahirah. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Michael J. Cooper. We are talking about his prequel, The Rabbi's Knight. As we get into this second segment, I do want to give you your second and final reminder that if you want to help the podcast by going to gsmcpodcast.net and leaving a donation, you may do so. That would be extraordinarily helpful. You see the link in the video next to me, but it also scrolls throughout the episode in case you need a reminder. Just if you're feeling that if this is something that you would like to do to help not only the podcast, but the network as a whole. Again, it is gsmcpodcast.net. Again, all support is greatly appreciated. Thank you for the past, present, and future support that you give to this podcast. Before the break, Michael was talking about, of course, the prequel and some of the inspirations for it and where it started, some of the relationships within it. We're going to return to that conversation about relationships now. Michael J. Cooper, the book is The Rabbi's Knight. Which would be, I mean, it could be a complicated friendship in any era, but this is 1290. So even just between a man and a woman having a friendship. So talk a little bit more about that relationship and how it evolves.
Well, it's interesting because, obviously the Muslim woman is in that section of the Holy Land controlled by the Mamluks. In this case, this is their meeting takes place on the northern shore of the Galilee and in a very unlikely place, a leper colony on the shores of the Galilee, because Zahirah was a young woman who was very beautiful, and an emir in the town of Safed, which is about, I guess, 30 miles from the Galilee, looked upon her as a potential addition to his harem.
Right.
And she had absolutely no desire whatsoever to be in the emir's harem, and so she hid in a leper colony where she would be safe, at least from the emir. And she tried to protect herself, obviously, so that she didn't get the disease.
Yeah.
But that's how they meet. And when the rabbi and Jonathan, the knight, are traveling towards Jerusalem, they pass through this place, and the rabbi decides that a lot of the people there may not have, in quotation marks, true leprosy, and so he's going to do them the potential release by determining if indeed there's enough basis for them to be locked in this colony for the rest of their sad lives.
Mm-hmm.
And she is one of the last people who is examined, and that really is a delightful and interesting moment, in the book, where she's basically wrapped in rags, and ultimately the rabbi who's examining her, and it was very traditional for rabbis to be sort of public health officers in
Mm-hmm.
regards to infectious diseases, and so he basically is telling her, show me your hands, show me your face, and when she drops her coverings, her skin is perfect.
Yeah.
And it's at that moment that Jonathan sees her, and when she looks at him, he obviously averts his eyes out because of his vow of celibacy.
Right.
But anyway, it's a beautiful electric moment. And if you beg me, I'll read it to you. But you'll have to read the book.
Well, actually, I thought that whole section was really interesting because uh, maybe people know more than I do about leprosy. I know a little bit, but just like the description of the rabbi talking to each person, the questions asked, the examination, how he went about it, how he,
Yeah,
because we don't always think of 1290 as being the most um, technologically advanced in terms of medicine, but like
yeah,
the very careful and respectful way he goes about it, I thought was very well done, and nicely
thank you,
written. Uh,
thank you.
I would imagine there was some research into some of this.
Well, my knowledge about leprosy is not extensive, never having seen a case. But obviously, in medical school, we learn about it, also called Hansen's disease. And now that it's treatable with antibiotics,
Which is
it's
crazy.
no longer a scourge. But obviously, there are pockets of leprosy that do occur in the world. But
Right.
clearly, this was something that I did also research a good deal about. What's interesting is part of that research is basically from Jewish scripture, because there are tomes of Talmud as well as in the Old Testament that relate to the nuances of the skin manifestations of
Yeah.
leprosy. It's really in a way beautiful, because it really focuses a lot of attention on making a clear diagnosis. Sadly, once the diagnosis is made, what it meant for the sufferer is that they got to suffer some more by being isolated
Right.
in colonies. And that obviously was the case not only in Europe, but throughout the world, and the Middle East in particular.
Right. Yeah. Since this is a prequel, can you talk about the connections to then Crossroads of Empire and oh, I just blanked out. I'm so sorry.
And Wages of Empire.
Wait,
Well,
wait, yes, thank you.
yeah.
Um,
The connections, basically, there are some very thin golden threads that connect the books, because they're essentially a series.
mhm.
And I'm actually calling it now Seasons of Empire.
Oh,
But
okay.
I don't know if I'll stick with that, but for now, that's what the series is called, Seasons of Empire.
Okay.
Starting with Wages of Empire, Crossroads of Empire, and soon to come, I hope, End of Empire. That's all set around World War One.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the prequel here is set, at the end of the Crusades in 1290. And the other connecting thread, other than the St. Clair bloodline, that again starts here with Jonathan St. Clair,
Yeah.
and with a prologue that's even set before that, at the very beginning of the Crusades in the 10th century. But that thread is one thing that stretches through. The other thread is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
These are the connective main elements of the connective tissue that connect all the books,
Yeah.
including the soon to be rewritten. Um, uh, Now I'm blanking on it. Foxes in the Vineyard, which
Yes.
is in 1948. But again, I have to also massage those connections in order to make sure it fits well. So that's going to be rewritten.
Mhm.
That being said, the uh, prequel here sets the stage for what will develop in the life of the protagonist of Wages of Empire and Crossroads of Empire, Evan Sinclair.
Yeah.
And this family line is again very prominent both in Templar legend as well as in Freemasonry.
Mhm.
That's a historical fact. My wife and I actually stayed at the Sinclair Castle in Roslyn a few years ago, which again was absolutely riveting. It's a major experience when you research historical fiction and you are in a place in your head
Right.
for a long time and reading about it. And then when you finally see it, you get really weak in the knees, and and you get, as they say in Yiddish, verklempt,
Yeah.
because it's so wonderful to suddenly see what you've been dreaming for possibly years. The same experience I had, by the way, when I finally visited um, an area in Jordan that is a beautiful series of facades in a valley there, where ultimately, and this is from the Nabateans, where you see the antiquity there, and I'd written about that extensively, and suddenly being able to be there and see it was overwhelming.
Yeah.
And that being said, though, those connections then relate to Evan's journey in World War I, where I shouldn't give away too many spoilers, but okay, here he basically is almost drowned on a hospital ship's sinking
Right.
in the um, in a very bad storm, going from France back to England.
Yeah.
And he almost drowns, and when he wakes up, he has complete amnesia.
Yep.
And so in his journey of self-discovery of who he is, he goes to the area in Scotland where he basically heard he may come from, if he indeed is Evan St. Clair. And there he meets a cousin who he doesn't remember, but who had met him years before. And so he stays at the castle. And the extensive genealogy they have there basically is something that is available to him. And according to his cousin, there's a certain riddle and mystery in the family about how the forebears who had been at war during the Crusades came back to Scotland. And so that in delving into that mystery, that family mystery, in order to discover himself, he discovers basically the answer to that, and that involves the plot line in The Rabbi's Night.
Right. Yeah. The family connection, the family mystery that Evan discovers when he is in Scotland in the second book of the Empire trilogy is tied into this prequel and what is going on with the mystery and the mystery of trying to figure out what the scroll that Jonathan has means. And so we get this connection. You have to read it so you can find out the connection as well. You have to read this one, you have to read the other ones so that you can see how everything is intertwined and connected. We're going to take our second break of this episode. When we come back, reality versus imagination on some of the places that Michael has visited in the course of doing his research for this series of books. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Michael J. Cooper. Before the break, Michael was talking about research and places that are included in the books and how they're included and how they're important and significance, and also researching those places, sometimes visiting those places. Bringing this back up because we are going to be going back to that conversation and wanted you to remember the researching of places so that you know what this next comment will be in reference to. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Michael. But for you, when you actually have gone to the places that you've been researching, do they match up with what you were imagining, or not always?
Well, it obviously is enhanced because, for example, I wrote a chapter in Wages of Empire that involved Wilhelm II and his estate at the Achilleon on the island of Corfu, which I visited. But I had written about it before I visited it. And from what I understood, You can sail in. There's a pier that's still called the Kaiser's Pier to this day, and from there you can go to the Achilleon. Well, little did I realize that the way the island is structured, you basically have the shore, which is some places quite narrow, as is right there at the Kaiser's Pier, and then you basically have a cliff face going up. And so, and my wife and I actually had e-bikes because of the terrain. On a regular bike, we would have been pushing it all the way up because it was very steep, very switchback, all the way up. And so I had to change the very easy transition of a particular character who lands at the Kaiser's Pier and then goes to the Kilian. I had to change that, to really express, the face that he's actually climbing in order to get up there. That's just, a single example. From the standpoint of Petra, this place in Jordan that I mentioned before, that exceeded expectations because it was so monumental. When you actually look up hundreds and hundreds of feet, in the air, to see these huge facades, it just takes your breath away. Yeah. And so there's moments like that are just absolutely beguiling and delicious, that occur when you have done the research and then actually see it. And then, clearly some rewriting, is frequently necessary.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a recommendation for reading order? Would you recommend people start with the prequel and then move into the trilogy of Wages, Crossroads, and potentially end?
Yeah. That's a delicious question that I'm struggling with right now, because on one hand, each novel stands alone, conceivably. And there is a certain, just like perhaps when you look through a box of photographs, it's kind of wonderful when you flip through the photographs and here's one, of a distant relative, from the 19th century. And then here's one of you when you were, in third grade. And then there's another one. It's just a delightful way that the memories rise in a random fashion in surprising ways. And that sense of surprise is perhaps the opposite of linearity. On the other hand, I really feel that it would be a good journey to start at the beginning with the prequel, as it were, with the Rabbi's Knight, and then go forward in time to the next stop, which would be 600 years later, in 1914, at the beginning of the First World War, which was of course not called First World War at the time,
right? And
you have to make sure that you don't make that historical fiction error. But the Great War, or the war, to save civilization, which they did call it, or the war to end all war, which they called it later. But so I think that there's something to be said for linearity. So I would certainly recommend starting with the Rabbi's Knight, then Wages of Empire, then Crossroads of Empire, God willing soon, End of Empire, which will, I think, take us to Versailles. And then, again, once the rewrite is done, it's a short trip forward to 1948 with Foxes in the Vineyard, coming soon.
Yes. But there is something to be said about kind of being involved in Evan's story and getting to that point where he learns about his family history and that genealogy, and then you kind of jump back to
that wouldn't be bad.
Yeah. But it's kind of like those of us that grew up with the original Star Wars. Which way do you watch them?
Yeah. It's amazing. They started with episode 4, of course.
Right.
How they knew that, I don't know.
Right.
But, I think that that would be an interesting way to address it as well. And maybe more compelling, because that might be a more accessible area of history for most people. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer, but as a matter of fact, I'm working with a screenwriter right now who, you get a lot of emails, unsolicited emails from all kinds of people, some of whom are based in Lagos, Nigeria. Some are based in Northern California. But
Right.
you get a lot of these, and are they scams? Some of them are, perhaps. I don't know. You really have to be very careful.
Hmm.
But so I got this letter from a screenwriter who basically said, he'd like to talk to me, or I got actually from his secretary. And again, with some sense of skepticism, I made the call and talked to the guy, and it was like talking to an old friend. I Zoomed with him, which also helps because you can
Hmm.
actually see a person
Right. Oh,
as
yeah.
opposed to whatever character they've created, via an email account.
Yeah. Catfishing you.
And ultimately, I also looked him up online and saw that he had a lot of A-list characteristics. And so we started working together, and he actually is starting his uh, TV trailer, pardon me, pilot pitch with Wages of Empire.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So as you said, that may be a good place to start. He
Yeah.
thinks so.
Yeah. And that could be potentially multiple seasons because, I mean, each book could be a season, frankly,
Well,
should be.
yeah, that's what I was thinking, because when I actually tried with actually my first book, Foxes in the Vineyard, to write a screenplay, it was absolute agony because talk about killing your darlings.
Hmm.
It's like Holocaust for darlings
Hmm.
with writing a screenplay, because you just really have to clear away
Right.
all the clutter of language,
Yeah. That,
exterior, or night, whatever.
right. That would be so hard.
Yeah,
Um,
writing it myself was really hard. I managed about 5 or 6 pages, and then I just gave up. And so I knew that I wasn't going to be up to the task, because, and if you're thinking, and some of your viewers may be interested in the whole idea of the transition from book to film, or pardon me, book to a film versus a series.
right.
uh, it is really daunting, to cut things down, to 150, pages, which more or less corresponds with,
Yeah.
150 minutes of a movie. So, that's daunting. And
Yeah.
so, but ultimately, he felt that starting with Wages of Empire made sense, at least in his mind, for the pitch.
Yeah. I've been disappointed so many times about some of my favorite books being turned into movies that then cut out all of my favorite parts that I wouldn't even want to start trying to write a screenplay because
Well,
I would be paralyzed.
one of the things that's engaging also about this gentleman, I don't know if I should plug his name, um, Alan Roth.
Okay.
But one of the things engaging about Alan is the fact that he wants to meet every week on
Hmm.
Zoom, because he's back in New York, and so we meet and we go over, and so I also can give him some input as to what I feel about what's in, what's out, and generally I really appreciate what he's doing,
Yeah.
because again, you do have to look towards brevity and
Hmm.
towards a visual impact, versus whatever wonderful prose has been crafted that
Right.
took you so many hours.
Right.
But ultimately, it's an interesting process, and I'm happy to be part of that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's nice that you get to be a part of it. Maybe
Oh God, yes,
maybe you
yeah.
can't make all of the decisions, but you can at least understand the reasonings behind why he's maybe making certain choices.
Oh yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
and also he reflects on my input, and then changes things sometimes accordingly.
Right. Yeah. Um, what are you working on currently? Book three in the End of Empire? Are you working on the 1948? Oh,
No,
or
no, no.
something else?
The 1948 is going to wait, because ultimately I really want, uh, there's something called a pitch deck, which Alan will also be putting together. In addition to the TV pilot, which is basically just an hour,
Hmm.
and that pitch deck will include an overview of the whole series,
Yeah. Okay. That makes
um,
sense.
from the Rabbi's Night to Foxes in the Vineyard. And in the course of that, the next piece that I really have to completely flesh out is End of Empire, which comes after Crossroads of Empire, so that will be a complete book, or at least a complete outline.
Yeah. So he knows where he's going, at least.
Right.
Yeah. I really think writing a screenplay from a book or a series of books would be an incredibly interesting, but for me, difficult challenge, because I love books so much, and I love characters and details and everything that doesn't necessarily go into a screenplay. So what an interesting process. And the people that take them on, and some of them are amazing, and some of them we don't like because our favorite details aren't in there. It would be so daunting for me, because all I would be able to think about are the readers who would be mad at me for leaving out their favorite details. But I'm grateful that other people take on those challenges and create some amazing works. And if this comes to fruition, I am very interested to see how it turns out. But we are going to take our next break of this episode. When we come back, I actually have some pictures to share with you that Michael sent me. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Michael J. Cooper. Before the break, he was talking about a possible screenplay and the process of collaborating with the person who was working on that. As we get back into this segment, when he's been on before, we've talked about historical figures that he includes in his books, and this book is no different. In previous interviews, he has shown pictures, because the other books are set around World War I, where, of course, there is the photography was possible. There were pictures of historical figures, and he has shown pictures in the interview. He did send me some pictures. Obviously, in 1290, you do not have pictures of historical figures, maybe some artwork, but he and his daughter actually put together some images from the Rabbi's Night, and so I do want to share those with you. For those of you who are only listening to this interview and not watching it, I do apologize that you don't get to see them, but they are some really lovely images put together of Jonathan St. Clair, Rabbi Samuel of Baghdad, and Zahirah, and just the light in the pictures that we're looking at right now is really beautiful. So for those of you who are watching, here are some images, and maybe if you have read the book already or you're planning on reading the book, you can have these in your head to picture the characters as you are learning about their relationships and reading about everything that they go through in this story. Let's go ahead now and return to the conversation with Michael J. Cooper. Again, the book is The Rabbi's Night. You always include some very interesting historical figures in the midst of your stories. This book is no exception, The Rabbi's Night. Do you want to talk about anyone in The Rabbi's Night?
Yeah, what's interesting about writing historical fiction is that you have you get away from the kind of binary plotter pantser dynamic in regards to whether or not you're outlining everything beforehand or not, or just doing it by the seat of your pants. which kind of mostly do the latter. But with historical fiction, you stay within a historical scaffolding, more or less all the time, where you want to make sure that your characters, that your historical characters, are being served, that you're doing them justice from the standpoint of their real historical arc. Obviously, they're going to be saying things that reflect the sense of what you've seen from their writings about them, biographies or their autobiographies or their writings. A case in point, of course, would be in Wages of Empire would be T.E. Lawrence, who wrote extensively, or Gertrude Bell. These were letter writers who basically had their letters published afterwards, and it's just a trove of wonderful information about their voice and their experiences firsthand. When we're dealing with the 13th century, 1290, to be, there isn't a lot of primary source material.
Right.
Indeed, the rabbi in the Rabbi's Night, came from, I was casting around because I really wanted to find a prominent rabbi from the time. And so at the time I had stolen my mother's Encyclopedia Judaica, which was 27 volumes, and she wasn't using it. It was just collecting dust. Now it's collecting dust again because we have internet now. But when I started research in the, sort of early mid-90s, that wasn't a thing. And so I came upon a character, Rabbi Samuel ben Cohen. I can't remember exactly, his lineage, but it's all expressed there, who basically had like about, 3 sentences in the Encyclopedia.
Okay.
The only thing that was known about him is that he was sort of the last Gaon of Baghdad. The Gaon was sort of a very high legislative and religious position in a Jewish community in the Levant, in the middle, in that part of the world. And he was sort of the last Gaon, the last of these, because the Mongols had basically moved west, and with that, a lot of the Muslims and a lot of the Jews left. And that's basically the dynamic that we find ourselves in this moment in history, where the rabbi has moved out of his academy in Baghdad before the book's beginning.
Yep.
And also a friend of his, El-Hassani, who was a brilliant mathematician, physician, and cartographer, had also moved out of that side of the world. And so he was in Jerusalem, and the rabbi had made it all the way to Safed, on his way to Akko. The little entry in the encyclopedia basically stated that this particular rabbi had written 2 letters to the Jews in Akko, excommunicating a certain renegade rabbi from France, Solomon Petit. This is all historical, who was a virulent critic of Maimonides, who was a great medieval Jewish philosopher who ultimately really changed the whole experience of Judaism throughout the world. But he, again, came from the Levant, and perhaps Rabbi Petit, because he was from France, felt that, why should I listen to this guy in regards to the way that we practice Judaism? And so there were 2 camps, and there was a major controversy. Just to get boring, the Maimonidean controversy that actually was very heated. And in Petit's case, it led to a fair amount of violence. He actually tried to destroy Maimonides' tomb in Tiberias, and he also sought to burn all of his papers that he could get a hold of. And so because of that behavior, this rabbi from Baghdad, who was again in charge of what happened in the Levant, issued these letters promoting his excommunication if he didn't turn from his ways, and he wasn't about to.
Hmm.
And so that was also the purpose of the rabbi planning to come to Jerusalem to deliver these letters that, according to the encyclopedia, my mother's encyclopedia, these were written in 1288.
Okay.
So that coincided with the time close enough.
Yeah.
So I have him then in this book in 1290.
Yeah. But it's
That's
amazing.
when they meet.
It's amazing how you can take something, three sentences from something like that
Yeah.
and just flesh out a character and, kind of the what if, how might this have looked?
And what was really great about that is, obviously when you're dealing with Winston Churchill, you basically have a character that there's so much written about and so much
Right.
known about, you can't really fudge at all.
Yeah.
But here you basically have what's called, in I guess historical research, a lacuna of unknowing, of a
Yeah.
lake, and which is deep and wide, especially in regards to a character who was so prominent in the world, yet all that remains of him in the encyclopedia is this scant evidence. Two letters written in 1288, and
Right.
otherwise he disappears from history.
Yeah.
And so, you can basically then create, and what I've created is, and I also felt almost as if he was channeling me. And
Mm.
and so everything about his character was done with a lot of care and love, and for who this person might have been in
Yeah.
regards to his openness, especially the way that he treats this Knight Templar,
Yeah.
and one knows that the knight isn't there to kill him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, right. Yes. We talked a little bit before about how this was something of a rewrite, an updated version of a previous book. So one of those updates was a little bit more emphasis on women's fiction with the Muslim character. Can you talk a little bit more about her?
Yeah. So again, this particular version of the Rabbi's Night is very similar to the one that came out about 10, 15 years ago, but with the following change. Given that female characters often remain overlooked in historical narratives, especially about the Crusades, especially in the Levant, what I wanted was to create a sort of a new perspective, because Zahirah was already in the book, but I wanted to enlarge her perspective in this newly revised edition with a greater focus on her story of like forbidden love,
Mhm.
unspoken desire, moral complexity, and all through the eyes of a more richly drawn character.
Yeah.
So I wanted to blend, the mystery, suspense, and intrigue of the historical adventure, but I wanted to add to that, again, not only the inner turmoil of the Knight Templar, which is, a narrative, where he's torn between desire and his vow of chastity,
Right.
but also the Muslim woman who's navigating a very narrow world, constrained by very strict traditions and
Yep.
very limited expectations. And so this story explores that dynamic tension, as well as the tension, between them, which rises with every glance where he's, forced because of his vow to look away, and every
Right.
spoken word, every unspoken word. And so I hope that readers will experience the same sense of yearning and restraint and passion that I felt while writing it, because it was really, I really enjoyed that.
No, I would imagine that was a fun challenge to get that balance and the tension right.
Yeah.
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 Go, well, since I've talked to you beginning of the year, what have you been reading?
Basically, I read a lot of the type of biographies, autobiographies that inform the historical fiction, obviously,
Right.
that's set in a remembered historical time, i.e., First World War.
Yeah.
So, I continue to consult that oracle, whether or not it's Gertrude Bell's writings, whether or not it's T.E. Lawrence's writings, not just them as particular characters, but also them writing about the time and about
Yeah.
what's happening and about when, including, the weather, when it comes to, and the wonderful interactions that he has with Faisal and with other of the Arabs who's basically leading, because this coming book, vis-a-vis World War One, is basically really involved with the British assault coming up from Egypt, through the Negev Desert and into the Ottoman territory, Ottoman Palestine, towards Greater Syria.
Yeah.
And so this is a very dynamic moment in history, and you have to be true to the historical record. So I'm basically just doing a lot of research. I occasionally, will glance at something else,
Right.
A friend's book. If somebody wants me to be a beta reader, I do that. But ultimately, I'm really constrained by the narrow focus that I have to impose upon myself in order to try to really finish this last segment, End of Empire, as quickly as I can, without obviously undue pressure, but ultimately, really wanting to get things right.
Right.
Because you only have one chance to do that, unless, again, you rewrite again in another 10 to 15 years,
Right.
but I don't think it will be an option for me.
Right. It makes sense that Michael's current reading is research focused, because even though it is a very narrow focus, what he is researching and writing about, there are a lot of details that go into what he is researching, just because of the nature of the time period, what he's writing about, etc., which is exactly what we are going to talk about when we come back from this final break of the episode. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Michael J. Cooper. Before the break, Michael was talking about what he is currently reading, that it tends to mainly be very research focused for End of Empire. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Michael. And narrow focus, yes, but so much detail and so much information in this narrow focus, but because of what you're writing about.
And again, one of the challenges is not to make it look like all the research, because
Right.
there's a real desire, and my critique group is not at all shy about pointing it out to me when I'm info dumping,
Right.
because I've got so much great research. I'm so in love, with the stuff I found. I just got to tell the reader,
Yeah.
and sometimes obviously really err on the side of profuse detail,
Right.
and it completely takes away. So less is better.
Yeah.
But the more that you're informed, the more you're able to kind of just weave in gently into the lattice work of what you're creating, just a fine thread of historical fact without getting, lecturing.
Yeah. I think I've probably said this all 3 times that you've been on the podcast, but I love those little threads because, when you read historical fiction, you think, oh, I want to learn more about that, which might lead you to one of those biographies or,
Yeah.
A more historic text, something like that. And then you start reading those.
And that's one of the things I enjoy. For example, when Evan is saved after he almost drowns in the beginning of Crossroads of Empire, he's brought to a tavern
Mhm.
in Lyme Regis, and that there is a tavern in Lyme Regis. I can't remember the name of it, Pelican's Inn. I can't remember the name of it right now, but that was the name of it. And that had been the place where a young sailor had actually been brought, but he was dead. And the owner's dog, it's a lassie, what do you call Lassie was a, help me here.
Oh,
A collie, yeah.
collie.
Like a
Some
like a
kind of
half-breed
collie.
a half-breed collie of the owner had basically sniffed him out and licked him, and suddenly, he basically was discovered to be alive.
Right.
That took place in the beginning of World War I, and that was where the legend or the story of Lassie originated. I did not know that.
Yeah.
And so I basically used some of the names of the characters, mixing them around, and I also acknowledge all this in the notes about characters, but to bring that moment in to the book, which was historical. Obviously, I changed lots of details.
Yeah.
But that's the way. Obviously, Evan is discovered to be alive.
Right.
By this lassie.
Yeah.
And again, I bring her in also when the dog's owner comes to visit Evan in the hospital in Lyme Regis, and so there's more to that continues, but it's just wonderful when you're in these places. And Lyme Regis is another place I haven't been yet, but I certainly have that on my list.
Right.
Whether or not it looks anything like it did 100 years ago, I don't know, and probably not. And that's one of the interesting things that you sometimes get asked on panels. Somebody will ask you, if you're writing, for example, about something that happened in 1290, and they're asking you, I mean, how can you write about this if you haven't been to like this particular place in the Holy Land? There's some places, where I haven't been,
Right.
For example, in Syria.
Right.
How can you put this chapter in Syria in your book when you had never been to Syria? Well, first of all, if I went to Syria now and I visited it, it looks nothing like it did in 1290.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, you really have to, give some leeway to the author who's basically dealing in a time that is long past, and a world that isn't, there may be elements, but ultimately is completely unrecognizable over the centuries.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. For people who want to know more about the books, give us your website and any social media you're active on.
Yeah. Well, my website is michaeljcooper.net. That's easy to remember. I think I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook, and I don't think Twitter. I can't remember Threads. The point is that I'm out there, but this is something that I do begrudgingly. I have a
go to the website.
Publicist.
In other words,
go to the website. I have a publicist who basically is forcing me. Some people, I think there are basically two types of people in the world, and this doesn't, only apply to Neil Young. Some people love him, some people hate him. I happen to love him right now. I used to hate him. But there's also two people in the world when it comes to social media, those who love it and those who hate it. And I'm kind of, somewhere in that love-hate, area.
Yeah. Depends on the day. Sometimes I love it. Sometimes I just hear that. But the website has everything really you would need to know to learn about the books.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Michael, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure you mentioned, especially about the Rabbi's Night?
Nothing occurs to me right now, but I'm happy to check in with you again.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I always enjoy speaking to you, and I love that we now are 600 years in the past and we have this whole huge scope of history to talk about. Thank you for joining me.
Sarah, thank you. I really appreciate these opportunities.
Thank you again to Michael for not only coming to talk about the Rabbi's Night, but the series as a whole, and for returning for a third time to talk about, again, all three books and how they are connected and intertwined. And if you are a fan of historical fiction, maybe you've read Crossroads of Empire and Wages of Empire, maybe you haven't, in which case you have 3 books to read before End of Empire, and then there will be the one in 1948, which Vineyard, Foxes and Vineyard. I cannot remember things lately. Like, I have words in my head and then I try to say them out of my mouth and they just float off into the ether. 1948. You have a whole series that you can partake of, and you can read them in the order that you choose. Like we talked about, you can read them prequel first. You can start with Evan's story and then backtrack and find those connections. They really do read as standalone novels, even though even the trilogy, as connected as they are and as they continue Evan's story, you can read them as their own standalone novel. Obviously, it's going to make a little more sense in the case of the trilogy to read them in order, since it is a specific time in history and it is the same character in Evan being the protagonist of those. So maybe those you want to read in order, not as standalone, but your choice, prequel or trilogy or prequel, up to you. I obviously read them in the order in which Michael talked about them in his visits on the podcast, and I will link those interviews for you to watch if you want to go back and watch the first 2 interviews. But I obviously read them in the order that Michael talked about them. So I read the second book, wherein Evan finds out the mystery of his family, and he's doing the research trying to figure out his own identity because of the amnesia, and then I get to go back to the prequel to make some of those connections, etc. So maybe just because that's the way I read them, I kind of like doing that backtracking, but I can see the definite benefit of reading the prequel first and then taking that knowledge into Evan's story with you. Completely up to you, of course. But thank you to Michael, and thank you as always to you for joining me. Please check out the series if you are a fan of historical fiction. I hope that you will join me next time. We have sort of historical fiction, not sort of historical fiction, but this is a dual timeline book. I will be speaking with author Kelly Estes about her book Smoke on the Wind. As I said, it is dual timeline. We are going back and forth between 19th century Scotland, early 19th century Scotland, and current day Scotland. 2 stories of mothers and sons, 2 very different stories, but there's also a bit of a paranormal, supernatural element involved in these 2 intertwining storylines. So I'm just going to leave it at that, and I am still finding out more as I read through the book in preparation for speaking with Kelly soon. So please join me for that conversation on the next episode. In the meantime, of course, as I always say, if you are a fan of this podcast and you have not done so already, there are several things that you can do to help the podcast. You can like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you are either listening to or watching the episode on. Helps the podcast get out to more readers such as yourselves. Something else that really helps the algorithm is to leave a nice review. Very, very helpful. I know people don't always like to leave reviews, but it doesn't have to be complicated. Don't overthink it. Don't be like me. I overthink everything. Don't overthink it. Just a one sentence reviews helps your favorite authors as well. If you love a book, leave a review. Many books get buried in all the online places that you can buy books, and reviews really do help and get the algorithm, jumpstart that algorithm so that you can find more books and authors and get those books and authors out to new readers. So leave the podcast a review, leave your favorite authors a review, just review everything. You can also find the podcast on social media, Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Usually I go in order and I can do them, I can just spew them out, but today got them out of order and got a little confused. Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. come find the podcast. By extension, of course, you get me. Hit me up with questions. Let me know what you're reading. Tell me all about everything. Are you reading spooky books because it's October? And if so, do you like straight up horror, or do you like the more whimsical side of Halloween? You know me. I'm whimsical all the way. Not great with horror, although I've read quite a bit because of the podcast. So I have maybe moved a little further toward straight horror. No, not away from whimsical. It's always going to be my first choice. But tell me what you're reading. Fulfill all of my nosy inquiries and tell me what you're reading right now. I hope you're having a great day. I hope you're having a great week. I hope you're having a great October, regardless of what is great or, unfortunately, maybe not great. Whatever's going on, I really hope that you are finding plenty of time to read and to get yourself lost in that good book. Thank you so much. I will see you next time.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to